Hello and welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and if you're new here, I've watched every single game, every summer playoff game of 2022 from all regions, yes, including that one, and I've been dedicating this show to reviewing / my thoughts of every day of Worlds, and it's the final day of groups. Only 1/3 of the teams remain. And today's a lot of really solid games, some unexpected plays, some very expected days. Things that should have happened like way longer ago. We say goodbye to 100 Thieves and Flying Oysters. I was really thinking the Flying Oysters would make it further than this, but the Royal never gave up. It really surprised me this tournament. So we're going to take a look at the reviews of some of the games. And if you want to see some of them, I'll be posting them onto my TikTok. The link is below. Without further ado, let's take a look at the first game. Our first game of the day, we have 100 Thieves, the second seed of the LCS, versus CTBC Flying Oysters, the first seed of the PCS. So incredibly clean out of 100 Thieves. Solid draft to answer the siege tools from the Flying Oysters, some of the best neutral setups of the tournament, actually using Belveth for neutral objectives, very strong vision play, and while some of the coordination was not quite there for some of the stage of the game, which is slightly worrisome for what they need to pull off to get to the quarterfinals, but it was enough for the Flying Oysters to get back into the game. The Flying Oysters, for their part, had zero proactivity. Gen.G holding no presence, needed to be more active, and wound up having lanes that had to scale, but with zero tools to properly use the siege and zone tools that they had drafted. It seemed like the life had been drained from them entirely. Hopefully they can bounce back from this, because just at least to make some contests for the quarters. Because, oh boy. My MVP for this game is Huhi, whose bandage tosses and flanking created incredible teamfight scenarios for 100 Thieves. Our second game of the day, we got CTBC Flying Oysters, the first seed of the PCS, versus Gen.G, the first seed of the LCK. The Flying Oysters with a much more proactive and coordinated approach this early game. It was bittersweet to see because the game plan was very clear. Early game power to rest, roam it around for neutral control. But as Gen.G really pushed on the other side of the map and the lead for Ruler became so big, the Flying Oysters wound up split up and resources couldn't go where it was needed. Couple that with Mission, who couldn't keep Jovi in control, we wind up with action and tempo all around the map that the Flying Oysters have zero control over. Gen.G keep up solid play, and seeing that this gives me hope we will see regular season and playoff versions of Gen.G from here on. It's really nice. The Flying Oysters have one last game and a chance to make tiebreaker scenarios, but we'll see. My MVP for this game is Peanut, who established such strong control around the map and really nullified the amount of influence Gemini could have. Our third game of the day, we've got Royal Never Give Up, the fourth seed of the LPL, versus 100 Thieves, the second seed of the LCS. So close, and yet so far. This draft from 100 Thieves I did not like for what the Royals had brought together with theirs, and yet they held tempo, map, and gold lead nearly the whole time. The issue came with their approach to the mid and late game, where the Royals started matching pressure and limiting how much the Thieves could really accumulate gold across the map. I cannot stress how close this actually was. At no point did the 100 Thieves crew actually fall behind in gold generation, nor did they ever let up the pressure. But they couldn't see how they needed to push what they needed to push over the edge, and then started fights leading to Royals holding all of the advantages in terms of major objectives and neutral play. And in two major Baron fights, the Royals get the win. Let's not say here that the Royals weren't proactive, because they were. Just always pushed to the limit of how much they could gain, and 100 Thieves should be commended on this play. My MVP for this game is really tough to choose, but I'll give it to Wei, who initiated every collapse and created an enormous amount of space for Gen.G. Our fourth game of the day, we've got Gen.G, the first seed of the LCK, versus 100 Thieves, the second seed of the LCS. Gen.G look like they are back in business. Forget the round one issues. This time around, it's tempo control, map control, balloon the leads, and never let your opponents play at all. Where the Thieves knew what was needed to get done against the Royals, this time they knew and could never get the ball moving, as Gen.G suffocated all options from the get-go. I cannot stress how scary it is to see a technically stronger draft from the Thieves lose on all fronts, passively losing gold when that isn't what we just saw them do against the Royals. Gen.G systematically took them down, and as someone that expected Gen.G to do this from the start, it's kind of weird to see it be done now when things are so tight for the first seed to get out of quarters. My MVP goes to Ruler, who had been so strong at all points of the game, really pushing the Thieves to the limits. Our fifth game of the day, we've got the CTBC flying Oysters, the first seed of the PCS, against Royal Never Give Up, the fourth seed of the LPL. CFO here attempting some interesting jungle plays to make sure that the map is split up, and to get Atlan, who they substituted in ahead, started to work until Xiaohu roams down to nullify any and all pressure. Or at least when Gala also gets two different triple kills, or when they get two Drakes and hold map pressure. The Flying Oysters had one game plan, and it started to work, but the lack of flexibility really hurt them in the long run of this game, as the pressure from the Royals increased more and more. The Royals are showing that they hold really solid play in the late game every game so far in groups, and it's really nice to see that they weren't floundering and hoping to have the Flying Oysters fumble their way to get a win. RNG looks so prepared to take on Gen.G that I wouldn't be surprised if they do go undefeated. My MVP for this game is Gala, who played this solution so cleanly that he felt like 3 champions in one. Our sixth game of the day, we've got Royal Never Give Up, the fourth seed of the LPL, versus Gen.G, the first seed of the LCK. Holy smokes, did Gen.G really have control of that game from the start, all the way till the end. There are moments where the Royals understood how to be proactive, when to answer or contest. It kept the game close, vision hotly contested, skirmishes on a knife edge. The issue, though, is that so much attention was put on the bot lane that Breathe wound up being there for protection duty instead of the main focus and win condition for the Royals, as he had collected so much resources on his own. Gen.G really upped the tempo they usually go for, which is wild to see them move to Baron, take it, disengage, lose only one, then turn to fight 4v5 and just end the game like that. It's usual to see them really up the tempo, but not so fast that as a team that fully understands their win conditions and went for it. And that should be incredibly terrifying for anybody else who has to face them in the quarters. My MVP for this game is Lehens, who created space, zoned, and nullified so many of the engage tools out of the Royals. Our last game of the day, the seventh game, is the tiebreaker with Gen.G, the first seed of the LCK, versus Royal Never Give Up at the fourth seed of the LPL. And this is what I meant when I said that Gen.G is the scariest team by far. This is the kind of shit I was expecting to see from the start. The Royals took their neutral setups and did excellently to carve out map pressure early and really understood where and when to have their fights. But the tempo lead was in full control of Gen.G, and they kept hold of the gold lead the entire time, allowing them to really maneuver the map in incredible ways, and especially create teamfights that look so criminal. Once the mid-game rolls around, it's all over, as Gen.G don't even let RNG breathe, let alone hit the late game, and the whole thing is done in 23 minutes. I'm so excited to see who Gen.G destroys next. My MVP for this game is Peanut, who had such a monstrous impact in the early to mid-game to facilitate fights and picks while surviving on the slimmest of margins, and really getting Dorn the leads he needed for him to be a monster. The day overall makes me reflect over the fact of the second week about the European teams and the North American teams peaking on the second week. Because the PCS and the Vietnamese teams didn't peak in the second week. They played pretty standard across the board for the 2 weeks, which is unfortunate because I think the Flying Oysters did fairly excellently, just that the matchups overperformed when it was necessary for them to qualify, which is unfortunate, and it just means that they were not enough for the tournament as it is. Same thing with GAM. 100 Thieves, for the other part, though, overperformed today, more than what people were expecting. And this is the same thing with all of the other North American teams and European teams, Rogue being the exception, who underperformed significantly. And I say that the European teams did overperform on the second week because, like, their first week, they seemed to play standard, if not just kind of underwhelming, minus, again, Rogue. Which, I wish that the tournament was longer for teams to really get their footing, but that the two stages were fused into one. This is, again, a rant about the format itself. But at the end of the day, the format is what it is, and the teams not being prepared enough is still a huge indicator. Heck, the teams that even went in through the play-ins that were like North American and European still had that time, that practice to like do something, and it helped, but it was just not enough. And I honestly just think that's super underwhelming, which is unfortunate. And I don't think a format change is necessarily going to do anything about that, but I think it would allow chances for teams who, even if they don't have the stuff to make it to the quarterfinals, that they'll at least be able to show a lot more than what they can do outside of 6 games. I think that's the disappointing thing, is that these teams have 6 games to show what they want. Maybe more, depending if there's a tiebreaker to make it through. I think that's really unfortunate. The other thing that I want to talk about, mostly because there is, I think that, well, it's 2 separate things. The Royals have really overperformed, and they're not the only team, honestly, that have overperformed that people didn't expect them to perform the way they did. Same thing with DRX. But the difference here is that the Royals have overperformed in a group that held the tournament favorite, or one of the tournament favorite, depending on whose point of view you have or argument. And they were competitive against them for at least 1 game, 2 maybe, depending on how you want to see the second game that they faced off against each other. Because that's what they were. There was decisiveness. A lot of their weaknesses were gone. But when a team comes in super hot the way that it happened, they're just lost to the situation, which is really bizarre to see, because they didn't have that kind of like ambiguous unknowing of like how to approach a situation that they did against the 2 games they had against Gen.G. Because on the day itself, just looking at their score here, they go 50-50 on a situation where most other teams who had first seed or first place going to second place heavily lost their advantages. So to me, that's a win on the side of the Royals, who I personally thought they were going to make groups and then just kind of fizzle and get eliminated. And instead, they bombarded through groups. They bombarded, they bombarded through play-ins, they bombarded through groups, and they're going to come into the quarters, I think, really challenging whoever they have to face. And, like, I know who they have to face, right? I kind of want to save that for a totally different video. I'm going to make 4 separate videos, or 4 separate videos, maybe. We'll see. I'll be making at least separate video regarding the matchup. But for the moment in time being, just really even analyzing any of the other 3 first seeds. They would have been way better against DRX. They could have easily taken that. It could have been close even. And then against Gen.G, that probably wouldn't have been as close. I'm not going to lie. But there is some level of competitiveness that, like, I think will work out pretty well. And with Gen.G, I just think they're going to sucker punch through them. I think they've figured out their funk and they've cast it aside and are just going straight through to the finals. 100%. Those are my thoughts, at least. I want to hear what you guys have to think in the comments down below. Do you think that, like, the Royals overperformed, or do you think this is totally what you expected? And do you also agree with me that Gen.G is just lamparding all the way through to finals? I'd love to hear what you have to think in the comments down below. If you like this kind of stuff, leave a like and subscribe. I've got also other videos here regarding everything that's happening. I appreciate everybody who watches. And with that, I'll see you next time when I do these breakdowns. Have a good one.